The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the ticking wall clock sounded like thunder. At the center stood Ethan Seagal, a young man in his late 20s, wrists trembling in handcuffs. His face was pale, drained of hope. Across the room, the judge adjusted his glasses, his voice cold and final. After reviewing the evidence, he said slowly, "This court finds the defendant guilty, and hereby sentences him to life in prison." A loud gasp echoed. Ethan's mother let out a sharp cry before collapsing into her seat. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking like gunfire. At the back of the room, Steven Seagal sat perfectly still. Dressed in a black tailored suit, hair slicked back, his expression unreadable, like a storm waiting behind still water. For weeks, Steven had been quietly attending the trial, never using his name, never asking for favors. He believed justice would speak for itself. But as he watched his nephew's life being destroyed by lies, that belief shattered in silence. The prosecutor smirked as officers began to escort Ethan away. Ethan turned his head for one last look at his uncle. His eyes said everything. "Help me, please." Steven's gaze met his, no words. Just the unspoken bond of blood and a promise. He slowly stood up, his movements measured, almost ceremonial. Every reporter turned their lens toward him. The judge paused mid-sentence as the tall figure approached the front row, calm and composed. "Mr. Seagal, please take your seat," the bailiff warned. But Steven didn't even glance his way. His deep, calm voice cut through the heavy air. "Your Honor, I will respect the court's decision, but justice hasn't been served here today." Whispers filled the courtroom. Some recognized him instantly. Others stared in confusion. Steven gave one last look at Ethan, then turned and walked toward the exit, each step echoing like a countdown. No one knew what he was planning. No one knew who he was about to call. Because when Steven Seagal picked up that phone, the entire justice system trembled. Outside the courthouse, gray clouds gathered like the world itself was angry. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions, but Steven Seagal said nothing. He simply guided Ethan's sobbing mother to the car, opened the door for her, and looked back at the building that had just stolen his nephew's future. Inside that courtroom, justice hadn't been served. It had been bought. As the car drove off, Steven's mind replayed every moment of the trial. He had watched the prosecutor, David Rowe, a man with slick hair and a smug smile, twist the truth like a serpent. He watched the judge ignore key evidence that could have freed Ethan. Ethan wasn't a criminal. He was a whistleblower, a software engineer who'd uncovered a corruption ring inside a defense contractor. The same company had government connections and friends in high places. The moment Ethan spoke up, the system turned on him. Fabricated charges, falsified evidence, and witnesses paid to lie. It was a setup from the start. Steven knew it. He'd brought forward documents proving Ethan's innocence. He even tracked down witnesses who could testify. But somehow every one of them went missing or refused to appear. When he tried to speak to the prosecutor before sentencing, he was blocked. The message was clear: stay out of it, Seagal. This is bigger than you. But Steven Seagal never stayed out of injustice, not when it came for his family. Later that evening, he sat silently in Ethan's mother's living room. The curtains were drawn. The air was heavy with grief. Ethan's mother wept into her hands, whispering, "He's just a boy, Steven. He didn't do anything." Steven knelt beside her, resting a strong, steady hand on her shoulder. "I know, and I promise you this isn't over." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was a calm certainty in it that made her lift her head, tears blurring her eyes. Outside, thunder cracked. Steven stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the storm. His reflection in the glass was cold, focused. Years of discipline had taught him one thing: when the law fails, truth still has a way of finding light. He whispered, "They think this is justice. They have no idea who they're up against." In the corner of the room sat a briefcase, locked, sealed, and labeled "Evidence Dismissed." Inside were files, recordings, and digital copies of communications that linked the prosecutor and judge to the very corporation Ethan exposed. Steven stared at it for a long time. Then quietly he picked it up. The next morning, news headlines painted Ethan as a traitor. Local engineer found guilty of data theft. Whistleblower or criminal? Public divided. But those who knew the Seagal name and the ones who'd seen Stephen fight for justice before began to ask questions online. Why was key evidence blocked? Why did the Attorney General's office go silent? The story was spreading, and Stephen knew he needed to act before it got buried. He went back to his home office, opened his laptop, and reviewed the files again. Each photo, each email, each timestamp was proof of the corruption hiding beneath the system. He could expose it, but not alone. He needed someone with real authority, someone who could cut through the layers of bureaucracy and fear, someone powerful enough to make even the corrupt tremble. Stephen took a deep breath, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a secure satellite phone, a device he hadn't used in years. The kind that connected to people above the law, and sometimes beyond it. He looked down at the number on the speed dial. One, Dad. For a moment he hesitated. His relationship with his father had always been complicated. A man of immense power, duty, and distance, the U.S. Attorney General himself. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Stephen left government service to live a quieter life. But blood was blood. And today blood had been wronged. Stephen's thumb hovered over the call button. Before pressing it, he closed his eyes and whispered a single line under his breath. When justice sleeps, men must wake it. Then, the call connected. A deep voice answered on the other end. Stephen, it's been a long time. Stephen's tone was steady. Dad, they just sentenced Ethan life, and it's not justice, and it's politics. A pause. The sound of papers rustling. Then the cold, commanding voice of the Attorney General said, Send me everything. Stephen's eyes flickered. The storm outside began to ease, but the storm inside the system was only beginning. Have you ever seen an innocent person punished while the guilty walked free? Tell us your thoughts below, and let us know. What country and city are you watching this story from right now? I want to see how far justice travels. That night the Seagal mansion was quiet, too quiet. No reporters, no calls, no cameras. Just rain tapping against the windows, steady and relentless, like time itself refusing to stop. Stephen Seagal sat alone in his private dojo, the same room where he had trained for decades. Candles flickered on the wooden floor. His black gi hung loosely over his broad shoulders, his hair tied back, his breathing deep and calm. On the surface he was motionless, but inside a storm brewed. He had seen injustice before, in the streets, in war zones, in courtrooms where power mattered more than truth. But this time it was personal. His nephew, a kid who once followed him around the gym with wide, admiring eyes, was now sitting behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Stephen closed his eyes, feeling the weight of it. His mind replayed every word from the judge, every smug smirk from the prosecutor, every tear from his sister. The pain hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. He whispered to himself, You can cage a man, but not the truth. Slowly, he rose from the floor and began his ritual, a silent kata, every movement precise, measured, and controlled. His body flowed like water, but his mind was steel. Every stance, every strike was a release of anger and a vow. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating his reflection in the window. Calm face, cold eyes. The same eyes that once terrified criminals, now fixed on a single purpose. Across the room, the briefcase sat open on a table, filled with Ethan's case files, evidence the court ignored. Beside it lay the phone he'd used earlier. The line with his father had gone silent after 2 words. Send everything. Stephen had done that. He sent the files, the data, the witness statements, everything that proved Ethan's innocence. But he knew bureaucracy moved slowly, even when it was his father pulling the strings. So while Washington gathered paperwork, Stephen gathered resolve. He picked up a small frame photo from the table, a picture of Ethan as a boy, standing beside him in a karate uniform, both of them smiling after a local tournament. You fought fair, Stephen whispered to the photo. Now it's my turn. He set the frame down and walked to a safe on the far wall. With a few clicks, it opened to reveal several secure drives, encrypted files, and 2 thick folders marked confidential. He grabbed them, placing them beside Ethan's case. Every name, every bribe, every false testimony, he had tracked it all. He wasn't just going to fight the system. He was going to expose it. The next morning, Stephen arrived at a small diner downtown, the kind of place where he could think without being recognized. He took a seat by the window, ordered black coffee, and waited. Moments later, a man in a dark trench coat entered. Mid-50s, tired eyes. The look of someone who'd seen too much of Washington's dirty secrets. "Agent Cole," Stephen greeted quietly. Cole slid into the booth. "I got your message." "I shouldn't even be here." Stephen leaned forward. "Then you understand why you are." Cole sighed, rubbing his temples. "The names you sent. That's heavy stuff, Stephen. You're talking about a conspiracy that touches judges, defense contractors, even senators." Stephen sipped his coffee, unfazed. "Then it's time someone touches back." Cole stared at him. "You can't go public with this yet. Let the Attorney General handle it." Stephen's jaw tightened. "The Attorney General is my father. He's doing what he can. But if they try to bury this..." He leaned closer, voice like ice. "I'll dig it up myself." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Only the rain outside broke the silence. Finally, Cole nodded. "You haven't changed." Stephen replied softly, "No, I've just run out of patience." Later that night, back in his dojo, Stephen prepared once more. He wasn't planning to fight with fists, not yet. He was preparing his mind. Every movement, every breath was sharpening his focus. As he meditated, his father's words echoed from the phone call earlier that day. "You've always believed justice should be earned, not demanded. Let me handle this through the law." But Stephen had seen what the law could do: twist, bend, or vanish altogether. He wasn't going to sit back while his nephew rotted in a cell. He opened his eyes, looked straight ahead, and whispered, "I'll give them one chance to do the right thing. Then I'll do it my way." The candlelight flickered across his face, casting long shadows on the wall. The warrior in him was awake. Not the movie star, not the celebrity, but the disciplined man who believed in honor before power. Tomorrow, he would act, quietly, strategically, unstoppably. If your family was wrongly sentenced for life, would you stay silent or fight back, even if it meant going against the system? Type your answer below. Let's see how many of you would stand for justice no matter the cost. Morning light crept across the marble floors of the U.S. Department of Justice. Inside the Attorney General's private office, silence hung heavy, the kind that comes before a storm. Behind the massive oak desk sat Arthur Seagal, a man whose calm authority had commanded Washington for decades. Silver hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation built on integrity. But this morning his composure was cracked. On the screen before him glowed a single word: confidential. He had spent the night reviewing the files his son sent, hundreds of pages of sealed documents, hidden reports, and unapproved transfers. Each line screamed corruption. Judges bought, witnesses silenced, evidence buried. And at the center of it all, the same prosecutor who had just sentenced his grandson, Ethan Seagal, to life in prison. Arthur leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His voice broke the silence. "My God, Stephen, what have they done?" He pressed the intercom. "Get me Director Harris from Internal Affairs now." Moments later, the door opened and Director Harris entered, tall, composed, but visibly nervous. "Sir, I got your message." "What's this about?" Arthur handed him a thin folder. "This case, the People versus Ethan Seagal, I want every detail rechecked, quietly, and I want a full background on Judge Raymond Holt and Prosecutor Linda Vance." Harris frowned. "That's a high-profile sentence. If we start digging, people will notice." Arthur's eyes hardened. "Then let them notice. If there's rot in my house, I'll be the one to clean it." Across the city, Stephen Seagal was already on the move. He stood outside a federal courthouse in a long black coat, his presence drawing silent attention. Inside his pocket, his phone buzzed, and a single text from his father. "I've seen enough. I'm moving. Stay low." Stephen looked up at the gray sky and muttered, "That's all I needed." He slipped into a black SUV and drove away, disappearing into the morning traffic. Back in Washington, chaos brewed beneath calm surfaces. Internal Affairs began to uncover what Stephen had suspected: bank deposits linked to offshore accounts. Case files altered after midnight, witness statements mysteriously disappearing. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. By noon, Director Harris stormed into the Attorney General's office. "So you were right. Judge Holt's been taking bribes through a dummy charity. And Vance? She's been coordinating with a private law firm that handles corporate defense for the same people your grandson allegedly worked for." Arthur's jaw clenched. They set him up. To protect themselves, Harris nodded. And that's not all. We found encrypted emails between the prosecutor's office and a contractor under federal investigation. They mentioned Ethan by name, said he knew too much. Arthur rose from his seat. Issue a sealed order. I want those files confiscated, tonight. Harris hesitated. Sir, that'll start a war in the department. Arthur looked him dead in the eye. Then it's time someone fights one. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Stephen visited his sister, Ethan's mother. She sat by the window staring at nothing. The strength she once carried was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion only grief could bring. When Stephen entered, she didn't speak, she just looked at him, eyes full of questions she couldn't voice. He knelt beside her and took her hand. I made the call, he said softly. Dad's working on it. Tears filled her eyes. You really think they'll listen? They don't care about us. They never have. Stephen smiled faintly. They don't have to care. They just have to fear what happens next. That evening, inside the Department of Justice, Arthur Seagal met privately with a small circle of trusted officials. Only 5 people were in the room, each sworn to secrecy. On the conference table sat stacks of documents and digital drives labeled Operation Slate. Arthur began, Gentlemen, this isn't just about my grandson. This is about a network inside our system, one that manipulates justice for profit. I won't allow this to stand, even if it means bringing down my own people. One agent asked, Sir, are we talking about a formal investigation? Arthur nodded. Effective immediately. And it stays off the record. No leaks, no press. If anyone asks, this meeting never happened. The agents exchanged wary glances, then nodded. They all knew what this meant. Going against powerful federal judges wasn't just career suicide. It was dangerous. But the order came from the Attorney General himself. There was no turning back. At that same hour, Stephen received another call, a voice he hadn't heard in years. Stephen, and it's Cole, you need to know, people are watching you. They've tapped into your communications. Whatever your father's planning, they already know. Stephen's eyes narrowed. Then they know they're running out of time. He hung up and walked out onto his balcony. The city light stretched endlessly before him. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what was coming. He wasn't just fighting for Ethan anymore. He was fighting for every innocent person crushed by power. And he knew, once his father made this official, Washington would turn into a battlefield without bullets. That night, as Arthur signed the classified order authorizing the covert investigation, he whispered to himself, Justice must not only be done, it must be seen. He pressed the seal. The sound of the stamp echoed through the room like a gavel of destiny. Do you think Stephen's father made the right choice by going against his own government? Comment yes if you believe real justice starts with courage. Even when it's your own system you have to challenge. The sun hadn't even risen when Stephen Seagal's instincts kicked in. He'd been meditating in the quiet of dawn, the world still asleep, the air still heavy, when he felt it. That familiar chill, the one that told him he was being watched. He opened his eyes slowly, scanning the reflection in the glass door. Across the street, a black sedan idled with its headlights off. No movement, no sound, just presence. He didn't panic. He didn't need to. Stephen Seagal had lived through war zones, bodyguard missions, and the underbelly of government contracts. If the system wanted to fight dirty, he was ready. He picked up his phone and called his father. The line was encrypted, but Arthur's voice came through, tight with concern. Stephen, I was about to call you. We've had a breach. Someone leaked part of the investigation files. They know we're onto them. Stephen's eyes stayed on the car outside. I noticed. Arthur's voice hardened. You need to leave the city. Now. Stephen shook his head. If I run, they win. I'll draw them out. Stephen, Dad, listen. You handle the justice. I'll handle the truth. He ended the call before his father could respond. A few minutes later, Stephen slipped on a black jacket, holstered a small camera, and left through the back alley. His movements were deliberate, slow, calculated. He wasn't just avoiding a tail. He was setting a trap. He moved through side streets, cutting across empty parking lots and deserted service roads until he reached an old warehouse by the pier. Inside, the air smelled of rust and salt. He waited in the shadows. Minutes later, the black sedan pulled up quietly outside. 2 men stepped out. Plain suits, government issue, but their formation gave them away. Not cops, not agents, cleaners. Stephen smiled faintly. So they sent their ghosts. He watched them approach, one holding a phone, pretending to text. Stephen's training kicked in. Every step, every angle calculated. The first man entered the warehouse, flashlight sweeping. "He's not here," he whispered. That's when Stephen dropped silently from the rafters. One swift strike, the flashlight clattered to the floor. The second man reached for his weapon, but Stephen disarmed him in a blink, twisting his wrist with surgical precision. Both men were on the ground within seconds, groaning but alive. Stephen crouched down. "Tell your bosses I'm not the one hiding." He tossed the man's phone on the floor, pressed the redial button, and spoke into it. "You're wasting time sending shadows. If you want me quiet, come do it yourself." He ended the call and walked away as the men struggled to recover. Across the country, Arthur Seagal faced his own war. The leak had triggered panic within the Justice Department. Emails vanished. Security footage was erased. The servers that held Ethan's case files were wiped clean overnight. Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. "They're burning evidence." Director Harris rushed in, pale and sweating. "Sir, we're trying to isolate the breach, but whoever's behind this, they have clearance higher than mine." Arthur's voice went cold. "Then we're dealing with someone inside my circle." He stood, straightening his suit. "Issue an internal lockdown. No one leaves this building until I say so. Sir, that'll cause chaos." Arthur's eyes flashed. "Justice isn't polite, Harris. Lock it down." Meanwhile, Stephen drove through the Los Angeles night, his mind racing. He replayed his father's words, "They know we're onto them." If the corruption ran that deep, even Washington couldn't save Ethan through legal channels. He needed proof. Something undeniable. Something even the media couldn't ignore. He pulled into an underground garage and parked beside an old contact, Detective Ramos, a veteran cop who owed Stephen a few favors. Ramos looked up from his car hood. "You look like hell, Seagal." Stephen smirked. "Good, I'm blending in." Ramos chuckled, then got serious. "I heard about your nephew. That case stinks. Word is the judge was sitting on sealed evidence." Stephen nodded. "You still got access?" Ramos sighed. "Barely. They've locked me out of half the system." But he pulled out a small USB drive. This fell off the back of a database. Stephen took it carefully. "What's on it?" Ramos leaned closer. A surveillance clip. Courtroom hallway, day before sentencing. Prosecutor Vance meeting with a man from the defense. Looks like a handoff. Stephen's eyes darkened. "That's the proof." Ramos grabbed his arm. "You didn't get this from me." Stephen smiled faintly. "You were never here." Hours later in his dojo, Stephen inserted the USB into his laptop. The grainy footage loaded. He watched as Prosecutor Vance accepted a small envelope from a suited man, Judge Holt's clerk. Money. Bribery. The entire frame reeked of corruption. Stephen hit record on his camera, capturing both the video and his voice. "This is Steven Seagal. I am documenting evidence related to the wrongful conviction of Ethan Seagal. If anything happens to me, this file will be sent to every major news outlet in the country." He encrypted the file and sent copies to 3 separate cloud drives under different aliases. Insurance. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The air was heavy with resolve. Meanwhile, at the Justice Department, Arthur Seagal received a coded message from Stephen. He opened the file, watched the same footage, and his face turned pale. "Good God," he muttered. "This changes everything." He immediately called Director Harris. "Get the Federal Ethics Bureau online. I want immediate subpoenas for Judge Holt and Prosecutor Vance, and I want this video verified." Harris hesitated. "Sir, that'll go public." Arthur's voice turned iron. "Then let the world see what justice looks like when it fights back. If your family was framed and the truth was hidden, would you risk your life to expose the truth like Stephen did? Type "fight for truth" in the comments if you'd never back down, no matter how powerful your enemies are. Morning broke with chaos. Phones buzzed. Screens lit up. Across America, millions of people were watching the same video. The grainy hallway footage of Prosecutor Vance accepting an envelope from Judge Holt's clerk. Within hours, it was everywhere. Justice for Ethan trended on every social platform. Reporters camped outside the Los Angeles courthouse. Talk shows dissected every frame. "This looks like bribery. This could expose a network of judicial corruption. This isn't just one case, it's a scandal." And at the center of it all was one name, Steven Seagal. He hadn't released the footage publicly, but someone had leaked it. The copy he sent his father was secure, which meant someone inside the department had gone rogue, or was fighting on the side of truth. Either way, the world now knew. In the Justice Department, Arthur Seagal's office was in lockdown. Phones rang nonstop. Aides scrambled for statements while federal investigators demanded answers. Arthur stood in front of the large screen, watching the video loop again and again. His hands trembled, not from fear but from fury. Director Harris entered, breathless. "Sir, it's out. Every network's playing it. The Senate is calling for a full inquiry. Judge Holt and Vance have gone into hiding." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then it's begun." "But sir," Harris warned, "if they realize the video came from Steven, he's in danger. You know what these people are capable of." Arthur's jaw tightened. "They'll regret underestimating my son." Across Los Angeles, Steven Seagal was already moving. He ditched his phone, his car, and his usual routes. He knew what was coming. Retaliation. He walked calmly through the side streets of Chinatown, wearing a dark coat and sunglasses. He wasn't hiding, he was positioning. The city buzzed around him. Unaware of the quiet war being waged in the shadows, he entered a small cafe, ordered tea, and took a seat near the back, where he could watch the street through the reflection in the glass. Minutes later, a black SUV passed slowly, its tinted windows rolling down just enough to reveal two men inside. Same suits, same dead eyes. Steven didn't move. He just sipped his tea. When the SUV turned the corner, he smiled faintly. You never send hunters to catch a wolf. That evening, as darkness settled over LA, the attack came. Steven was driving down an industrial road when a white van cut across the intersection. Another car appeared behind him, trapping him. No sirens, no lights, just silence. He braked, scanning the mirrors. 3 men stepped out, faces masked, movements tight and professional. Steven sighed softly, almost disappointed. "You boys really think I retired?" The first man lunged. Steven countered effortlessly. A quick disarm, a sweep, a precise strike to the neck. The second swung a baton. Steven ducked, twisted, and drove his elbow into the man's ribs. The third pulled a taser. Mistake. Steven caught his wrist, redirected the shock straight back into his attacker, and watched him collapse. In less than 10 seconds, the street was silent again. He leaned down over one of them. "Tell your boss the truth doesn't scare. It spreads." Then he vanished into the night. Meanwhile, in Washington, Arthur Seagal was facing his own form of battle. The leak had set the political machine on fire. Senators demanded hearings. Media outlets accused the Attorney General of covering up corruption within his own ranks. Arthur stood before the press, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. He took a deep breath. "Yes," he said firmly, "the video is authentic. And yes, this department will investigate itself. Justice must never be above the law." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted over each other. But Arthur didn't flinch. He knew transparency was the only weapon that could survive the storm. As he stepped away from the podium, a Secret Service agent whispered in his ear, "Sir, your son's been attacked in Los Angeles." Arthur stopped cold. "Is he alive?" "Unknown. Local units found a wrecked vehicle and 3 unconscious men." Arthur's eyes darkened. They just made their last mistake. Back in LA, Steven sat in an abandoned train yard, patching a cut on his arm. His breathing was steady, controlled. He looked at the city skyline and muttered, "They hit me because they're scared. Good." He took out a small encrypted recorder and began speaking. "This fight isn't about me. It's about every man who's been silenced, every woman denied justice, every innocent who never got a fair shot. If you're hearing this, know that truth always finds its way, even through blood." He uploaded the message through a secure satellite link, broadcasting directly to his father's private line. Hours later, in his Washington office, Arthur watched his son's video. His throat tightened with pride and pain. Steven's words echoed through the speakers. "If I fall, don't mourn me. Finish what I started." Arthur turned to Harris. "Activate Project Sentinel." Harris looked alarmed. "Sir, that's a national-level exposure order. It'll unseal everything." Arthur nodded. "Good. Let the whole world see who's been manipulating justice." For the first time in decades, the Department of Justice would investigate itself, live, under full media scrutiny. As dawn broke over Washington, news headlines screamed across every screen. Attorney General launches internal purge after Seagal scandal. FBI raids Judge Holt's estate. Prosecutor Vance in custody. And somewhere in the shadows of Los Angeles, Stephen watched the news from a safe house, silent, expressionless. The system had tried to bury him. Instead, he buried their lies. He whispered, "Justice isn't a word. It's a fight. If your life was in danger but telling the truth could save others, would you risk it all?" Comments stand for justice if you believe courage is stronger than corruption. 3 days had passed since the storm. The streets were calmer now, but the echoes of the truth still rippled through every corner of the nation. The scandal had exploded into the biggest federal case in decades. Judge Holt had been arrested. Prosecutor Vance faced charges of conspiracy and obstruction. Whistleblowers came forward one by one, terrified but relieved, revealing years of judicial corruption that had sent hundreds of innocent people to prison. And at the heart of it all, one name stood tall: Steven Seagal. Inside a quiet hospital room in Los Angeles, Steven sat by the window, his arm bandaged, a faint bruise along his temple. The doctors had wanted him to rest, but rest was never something Steven did easily. He gazed outside at the sunrise, golden light spilling across the city that had once turned its back on him. For the first time in weeks, his phone rang with a tone that brought him peace. His father's number. "Steven," Arthur's voice came softly through the line. "You made the news again." Steven smiled faintly. "Did I finally get good press?" Arthur chuckled, and a rare sound lately. "More than that. Congress is reopening dozens of cases. Ethan's conviction has been overturned. He'll be home by tomorrow." For a moment, Steven said nothing. His throat tightened. When he spoke, his voice carried both pride and quiet sorrow. "We did it, Dad," Arthur corrected him gently. "You did it, son. You reminded the world that justice isn't a position. It's a choice." Hours later, Steven walked through the courthouse where it had all started. The halls that once echoed with lies now buzzed with reporters, lawyers, and cameras. But he wasn't there for attention. He stood at the same spot where the judge had sentenced Ethan to life, the same floor where his sister had cried, and his nephew had been taken away. This time the silence felt different. It wasn't pain. It was peace. Detective Ramos approached quietly. "They're talking about giving you a medal, Seagal." Steven turned to him, smiling slightly. "Medals don't fix the system, Ramos. Men do." Ramos nodded. "Still on what you did? It changed things." Steven placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't let it change back." That night, Steven returned home. Ethan was there, thinner, pale, but free. The reunion was wordless. They embraced for a long time. 2 generations connected by pain, forgiveness, and strength. Arthur arrived later, escorted by 2 agents, but this time not as the Attorney General, just as a father. As the 3 sat together, the room filled with an unspoken truth. Justice had a price, and they'd all paid it. Arthur raised a glass of tea, to Ethan, and to the men who stood when others stayed silent. Ethan smiled. To family. Steven looked at both of them, his voice calm and steady. To truth. They clinked their glasses, not in victory but in peace. The next morning, Steven walked down a quiet beach alone. The ocean breeze carried whispers of change. He stopped, hands behind his back, watching the waves crash and retreat. He knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption didn't vanish, it adapted. But so would he. Justice wasn't a single battle. It was a lifetime of choosing what's right, no matter the cost. He looked out toward the horizon, his reflection shimmering on the wet sand. "You can chain a man," he whispered, "but you can't chain the truth." Back in Washington, Arthur Seagal held a press conference. He stood tall at the podium, calm, commanding, but with a spark of pride in his eyes. Recent events have reminded us that justice is not measured by verdicts, but by courage. My son risked his life to reveal what others buried in darkness. Today, the Department of Justice pledges transparency, accountability, and reform. Because justice must never serve power, it must protect the powerless. The crowd rose in applause. Across every screen, his words replayed. A father's redemption, a system reborn. As night fell, the story reached its final chapter. Steven sat in his dojo once again, the same room where it all began. He lit a single candle, its flame flickering gently. On the wall hung a photo of Ethan smiling beside him in a karate uniform, restored, framed anew. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The calm had returned. The warrior had fought his battle, and won without ever losing his soul. If you believe no man should be judged unfairly, and that truth always finds a way, type "Justice Wins" in the comments. And subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, integrity, and redemption.